delayed meeting. Delayed as in it's a full agenda full of things that we have not been able to get to in any of our other compact meetings. So let's call to order. Let's start with the consent agenda. We have the town accountant's warrants, the minutes of January 22nd, and gift acceptances for the Concord Carousel Scholarship Fund of $1,620 given to the Carousel Preschool Scholarship Fund, for which we are very grateful. And in fact, I was just sitting in a meeting the other day when we were talking about how important preschool is, so that's wonderful. Then we have Sunday entertainment licenses for the Emerson Umbrella on March 25th and April 8th from 3 to 6 at 57 Ornac in the theater. And then one-day special licenses for the Rotary Club of Concord on the 6th of April from 7 to 10:30 at 51 Walden Street, wine and malt beverages. For the Military Friends Foundation on the 14th of April from 1 to 7 at 269 Monument Street, an all-alcohol license. And this was an interesting piece that I was curious about because the all-alcohol is not typically offered. I understand from Chris that this is because they're going to offer hard cider. Is that?
That's right,
Yeah.
and it doesn't
In
count as a
keeping with
wine or malt.
the tradition, and that doesn't get covered in a wine and malt beverage. Then we have the Miriam Community PTO on April 7th from 7 to 10 p.m., 74 Walden Street, wine and malt beverages. And then, boy, we have a lot for Emerson Umbrella. We have March 23rd, March 24th, March 29th, March 30th, April 5th, April 6th, and April 7th. Barely a day left. All from 6 to 11, 57 Ornac Street, wine and malt beverages. And then on the 25th of March, which is the day that was missed in between the 23rd and 24th, from 3 to 7 at 57 Ornac, wine and malt beverages. Then the 31st of March, from 2 to 11, 57 Ornac, wine and malt beverages. And on April 8th, from 3:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. at 57 Ornac, wine and malt beverages.
Move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Town Manager, do you have, I bet you have quite a
We
report.
have a few things to report, so bear with me. The comprehensive long-range plan is now out in draft, posted on the town's website, on the planning, the comprehensive long-range plan committee's web page. However, the public hearing that was scheduled for last Wednesday was canceled. The new date has not been scheduled, but likely be later in April after town meeting concludes. But the long-range plan committee is hoping for public comments on the draft plan, which they've put a lot of time on. The impacts of the storm, last week's storm wasn't too bad, although we got a substantial amount of snow. The Public Works Department and the light plant are both still cleaning up after the March 8th event, which was more challenging. There were about 300 house services knocked out, a total of about 400 customers in that March 8th storm that lost power. And it took a while to restore them because there were individual house services that came down. And there's still a lot of trees leaning on wires and down next to the roads and on sidewalks, so the cleanup will take some time. But we received some help from mutual aid from communities in Wakefield, Mansfield, and Burlington, Vermont. Have municipal light departments, and they sent aid crews that helped us a lot to get people back up. The warming shelter was open but not occupied. People did come and check to see if they might be interested, but didn't. Nobody stayed the night. But several people did offer to play the piano or read books to children and offer entertainment if anybody did come. So it was a nice community spirit in response to the storm.
If I'd known that was going, I would have walked down the street.
And I'll mention that the light plant does think we're fortunate to have our wires underground in many areas, particularly on Main Street where there's 3 circuits, and the trees that came down on Main Street would have knocked out probably power to most of the town if the wires were not underground. The compost area on Walden Street was open for residents free to deliver the branches and brush and things that had come down in the storm. And that area will open permanently for the summer on April 7th. Public Works Department had $60,000 in the snow and ice remaining before that event. That event probably consumed all of that 60, and then last week's storm consumed more. So we're running a deficit. It's perhaps in the neighborhood of $100,000. It's the one account towns are allowed to run a deficit balance in and to make up the shortfall in setting the tax rate next year.
I understand there's another storm coming this week.
And we are projected to get 4 to 6, I think, starting Wednesday night. Public Works Department also, between removing trees and opening up the roads, they cleared the artificial turf fields at the high school so the lacrosse and other teams could hold tryouts outside. The NRC's Concord cleanup starts on Saturday, the 24th. They're giving out the yellow bags. It's going to be hard to pick up the litter and trash on the roadside under these conditions, but they're going to give it a go. The Agricultural Committee is hosting a forum on spring agriculture on March 29th at the Willard School on farming in Concord and New England to kick off the spring season. Visitor Center will be open on April 14th, Friday, April 14th, just before the Patriots' Day weekend and holiday. We were hoping to open on the 1st, but it seems like the weather is not supporting that. But they will be offering the bike share program, the Zagster Bike Share, which they hope is a new draw. Topping off ceremony at the Minuteman Vocational School is scheduled for Thursday, April 12th, rain or shine at 11, which installing the final steel beam in the structure at the new Minuteman Vocational School. And Bruce Freeman Rail Trail MEPA filing. There's a walkthrough tomorrow afternoon with EPA officials at the bridge. The Phase 2B is the bridge over Route 2. So we've made a filing relative to that portion of the project, and the walkthrough is tomorrow. And then lastly, the Food for Fines program starts today and runs all week. So anyone with outstanding library fines, if they pay their fines this week, their funds will be donated to the Open Table food
So
pantry.
they can't pay their fine in food. They're
I'm not sure how that works. So, that's all I have.
Chris, ordinarily, if the snow comes during the time that the business offices of town are open, you make the call. But this timing of this storm, question about all of the meetings we have scheduled that evening. How is there a call made by you?
It's typically the board chair, because the board may be dealing with a regulatory requirement to make a decision within a certain time frame, or they may have people coming to make presentations and that sort of thing. So we typically have left it up to the particular board chair to make a decision on canceling a meeting and get the announcement out. So we post it when the chair has made that decision.
And do you have a hyperlocal forecast for this storm?
The forecast that I saw said there's a high likelihood that it will be in the 4 to 6 inch range. Flurries beginning in the afternoon and getting heavy after dark Wednesday night.
We'll have
Thank
to ask
Happy
the high
spring.
schooler, the high school meteorological group to find out.
And I know we got a number of nice notes about how responsive the light plant was.
Yeah.
Nice.
People were very grateful to see the power restored as quickly as it was, because in other communities, often it's several days before the power's back on.
Do we send the other communities a thank you note of some type, or?
Well, I'll make a point of doing that.
Yeah, I think it's
That'd be
always a
great.
nice remembrance, kind of, that is,
Well, and I know that we sent crews south during the hurricanes.
Middleborough, I think it was.
Right. Well, also down to Florida, right?
Oh, and then to Florida,
Right, so-
Homestead,
St.
Florida.
Thomas.
It's nice to see, well, yeah, it's nice to see that kind of
yeah.
sharing of staff. That-
Great. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes, thank you.
great. And then we are ready for the finance director's update.
Good evening. I'm Carrie LaFleur. I'm the finance director. I have two updates to provide you this evening, one on health insurance and one on the fiscal 19 budget. Under health insurance, two items to review. I believe it was back in January, I came to you and talked to you about some changes in our existing plans that we needed to negotiate. So we were successful in using a collaborative process, and there was no need to go through the regulatory process. The collaborative process involves a meeting with the Insurance Advisory Committee. It was actually several meetings that we had. There are representatives from each of the unions and non-union representatives on the committee. We were able to present the changes to them and come to an agreement on how we would implement. The implementation involves a mitigation payment, and I have those amounts for you. I'm not sure if you have seen the memorandum of agreement, But we will be providing a, boy, you'd think I'd have that in my head, $125 for families, and I believe it's $55 for single persons. And we arrive at that, we take 25% of the savings that result from the changes in the plan. So we made what we think are some minor changes. They were actually made by Minuteman Neshoba Health Group, which is where we purchase our insurance from, some minor changes to deductibles and some of the co-pays for office visits. So we have essentially completed that process. We're awaiting a few signatures, but everybody has agreed to do that. We did receive our renewal on our existing plans about a month ago, and the renewal on the existing plans was much better than what we had expected. The renewals range from 5% to 9.5% increases. We had originally been expecting over 10 and probably 12%. So the changes that we implemented resulted in about a 2% savings, so that was very helpful. And then the second thing that I wanted to mention relative to health insurance is we will be offering a high deductible plan for the first time, beginning with this plan year, beginning June 1st. We are calling this a pilot program. We're going to try it out for a year to make sure that all of our assumptions are basically accurate, and this is a good thing going forward, which we think it will be. These plans have a health savings account component to them, and you may have heard that Minuteman Neshoba Health Group has required that employers contribute some amount to these accounts up to 50%. We have done the analysis and believe that we can offer 50%, the full 50%, and still save money. These premiums are about 20% lower than the existing plan premiums, and even with the 50% employer contribution, we would be running below or just at what we're paying right now. There is also what we think to be a long-term savings in our OPEB liability. We should see a reduction in that because these plans are rated better, they're less costly. And so since we value our OPEB liability on an annual basis, we should know when we do the valuation for June 30, 2018, what the impact will look like. But that probably means the OPEB valuation will be even later than it comes in, and I'm looking at your audit committee representative because he knows how late those come in. We've done a lot in terms of employee information sessions. We held 2 last Friday. We had about 50 employees at each session, and there is a lot of interest. So we're hoping that this will be a good option, both for employees and the town. Any questions on health insurance?
I want to make sure I understood that this was an additional option for employees if they chose a high-deductible health plan, right?
It is an additional option. Yeah, there are some communities that are thinking maybe they want to move all employees to the high deductible plans. We haven't really had a discussion about that. We're hoping that employees will migrate over because it really is a nice opportunity for savings. In terms of premium, being able to establish a health savings account and set money aside for future health insurance expenses.
The high deductible is 4,000, is that correct?
It's $4,000 for a family. It's
Fairly high.
It is, I think, maybe for people that are on a private sector plan, that doesn't seem high, but it is much higher than the deductibles that we currently have. But our health insurance plans are expensive. They're expensive for employees, and we're trying to be responsive to employee requests. Well,
I think as long as it's a choice, it's great.
What's the cap on the health savings plan? Is there a dollar cap?
there is it's set by the federal government, and I believe it's $6,900 in calendar 2018, this calendar year.
I think it really gives employees who looking for that flexibility to, if you're never really using your insurance, this is a way to save money, and you're putting money away in your HSA. So you're preparing, but
Yeah.
it doesn't hit you like as hard as a more extensive plan that you pay a premium and you never
But
use
those are
it.
still, the health savings are still annual contributions.
Right.
They don't have any real saving.
So there's not a rollover.
No, that with the health savings account, you can roll them over.
Okay, so that was,
Yeah.
that was my next
That's the difference. We currently offer flexible spending plans that you can't roll over. The HSAs you can roll over. It belongs to the employee. If the employee leaves employment, they take that with them. You can use it for current expenses, or you could use it when you retire if you want to pay your, Medicare supplement premium. You can
Will the
pay.
town match be for how long? How long would the town be matching the deductible?
Well, this is a one-year pilot.
Oh, okay.
And then we will look at it and see, what the results are, and if it makes sense to continue that. The Minuteman Neshoba will require that there be some employer contribution, but they're not saying what it must be. It can only be, it can be no more than 50%. So it can be anywhere between 1% and 50%
And these are pre-tax?
pre-tax. Yeah,
So is the health savings account, the HSA is pre-tax.
it is. Yeah,
And this is the only plan that offers the HSA for employees?
that's
It
correct.
doesn't have flexible spending plans?
They do, and the others are not considered high deductible plans, so they're not eligible for this. So the other thing I wanted to mention to you is the fiscal 19 budget. On March 1st, the Finance Committee had a meeting, and after a lot of discussion, decided to revise its guideline. I'm not sure if you saw something that I sent out or not, but the new revised guideline increment for the town, for CPS in the district, is $3,778,000. That is an overall 4.6% increase. For the town, it's a 4.2% increase. For CPS, 4.49, and for the district, 8.9. Oh no, I'm sorry, those are the requests. 4.2%, 2.8 for the town, 3.9 for CPS, and 6.76 for the district. The additional increment in total was $834,935. And the way that they got to that, they made several adjustments in their original assumptions. The first is that instead of using, we had an estimate in for state aid, which ended up being lower than what the governor had. And so the Finance Committee, with my support or recommendation, we moved that up to what the governor had included, with the assumption or understanding that the legislature and the governor have already agreed to what the revenue estimate is for fiscal 19, and typically the final budget isn't lower than what the governor proposes. So there may be some movement potentially in some of the line items, but overall we thought that that was a reasonable thing to do. We also needed to make an adjustment for the pilot payment from the light plant, which was a decrease of $13,000. The pilot payment is based on sales, and we had an estimate in there, and when the actual calculation was done, it was $13,000 lower. So that is a net increase in available revenue of $185,000. Then we were able to back out our original assumption for health insurance and put in a new one based on the rate renewal, and that saved about $151,000. We made the adjustment for the actual assessment for Minuteman. That was a small amount. That was about $6,000. And then we also used what was in the governor's budget for state assessments, charges, and offsets. And then the Finance Committee also said, since the town is going to use the governor's budget, they urged the district to also use the governor's budget for revenue assumptions. And that would provide, for the Concord assessment, that would provide about $143,000 in additional revenue, or a reduction with the gap. So that's pretty much where we are. The estimated increase to taxpayers is about 3.19% with this increased.
But now the town's budget and the guideline are in sync.
The town's budget and the guideline are, CPS and the district are not yet, but the school committee has a meeting or two before town meeting to work on this.
But the gaps are closed.
The gaps are, for CPS, $215,000, and for the district, if you take into account that additional state aid, it's about $255,000. So much closer than we were 6 weeks ago or so.
A lot of hard work went into that, I know.
A lot of meetings.
Coming in higher than we expected.
Well, it's good to be conservative in our estimates so that we get good news.
Well, we actually had projected somewhat of an increase in state aid. It just was a little better than what we thought.
Just as while you're here, I'd say that we have here the management letter from the audit. And the audit committee's meeting Wednesday.
Wednesday.
We will then schedule some time to come talk to you as an audit committee.
Hence your concern about any closings on Wednesday night.
No, that's.
Wednesday
the
morning.
rotating pollinator committee.
Oh.
Was had at least 3 meetings canceled because of the snow. The auditors only can meet in the morning, because by the end of the day, they're just completely wiped out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And I see our town moderator is here, and we are ready to talk about,
Are
oh,
you
wait a minute, no, we've got,
gonna
maybe
do the
I-
leaf blowers first?
The leaf blowers.
Oh, you wanna do
first.
leaf
I
blowers
apologize.
first?
I
Yeah,
jumped
okay.
ahead. We have our Article 46
Scott Richardson.
discussions.
Yes, indeed. Hi, everyone. Scott Richardson, 260 Elsinore Street. I was the citizen petitioner for Article 46, and perhaps you've heard that I've decided not to move that article at town meeting. There was much relief throughout the land. And so I want to share with you what came from that process. It had its moments, but I think we actually came up with a pretty interesting idea that I wanted to submit to you for your consideration. Hopefully you did get a chance to receive the sustainable landscape. Okay, just highlight a couple things about it. The petition article sought to make a big impact very quickly in shifting our resources from fossil fuel to alternatives. And that was opposed by residents and landscapers who currently rely on blowers to maintain yards, commercial properties, school grounds, and golf courses. And they were, very clear about their opposition to that. The petition was supported on the other side by residents concerned about the health issues associated with localized air pollution. And other residents supported the petition because they feel like this is a quality of life issue for the town. So you put that in a pot and you stir, and what we came up with was, I think, a fairly, I won't speak for everyone, but a fairly broad agreement that this is a topic worthy of discussion. It's a topic worthy of investigation. There are potentially some things we can be doing as a town to move in this direction. And the idea of a committee was born. And working with one fellow in particular, but receiving input from a lot of people, came up with an idea for a committee called the Sustainable Landscape Committee. And the Sustainable Landscape Committee would essentially be a town-wide resource for some of the units of government, but for residents, for landscapers, to assist in the transition from the current model to a more sustainable model. So I laid out some of the objectives and the benefits that we could experience from having a committee if they could actually bring about some changes and some programs. And I put together a list of who I thought would be useful for the first cut of the committee. That's not to say that we wouldn't be interacting with a lot of other people. This obviously has a lot of connections to other environmental movements in town or other environmental activities. But I thought we'd have someone from the municipal light plant because the transition to electric obviously is very important. Someone from Department of Public Works, they've expressed an interest in being on the committee because of their use of the equipment. I think we need someone from the schools, familiar with the issues associated with grounds maintenance of schools. Someone with golf courses. We do have 2 golf courses in town, fairly heavy environmental impact. Obviously, the landscapers know a lot about this, and there's a number of them who have been very generous with wanting to be involved. I think we need to get people from CAN and CSEC and Reuse It, people who kind of in the environmental space. And then there are people in town who are quite good, I believe, about sustainable landscape practices, biodiversity, and how to design a landscape to minimize the use of water and equipment and fertilizers and synthetics and things. So I think we have a real opportunity to do something here. I'm proposing that the committee is 2 years because I think it's going to take us a while to collect some data. And I think we would both assess the situation, understand where we are today, try to quantify some of the impacts on the emissions, and then to the extent that we can, start to propose some programs. Programs in partnership with CPW, programs in partnership with other groups in town. And I think after a couple of years, if we do that with a lot of citizen input, I think we can actually set a model for something. So that's what I wanted to propose in lieu of the rather blunt force of Ann.
Scott, I want to personally and in general thank you. You've proposed a lot of different environmentally progressive moves for the town, and we certainly received a lot of feedback as a select board to this article. So you stirred the pot well, and one of the things I really appreciate about working with you is that you listen. And I look at this and say, wow, this was, a number of the folks who reached out to me personally, they could have drafted this because they were, while this, perhaps not ready for the warrant article, we're now interested, but afraid. And this sounds like you've really, really thought long and hard and come up with to use an overused word, sustainable solution to that space, and certainly something that hopefully will bring us some answers that have a lot of support. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I want to thank the people, many of whom are here, who contributed to the thinking.
I just have a couple of questions. Is it the amount of time that for the various departments, the light plant and the public works, I know meetings generally take place in the evening, and we've got people whose jobs, it adds an extra burden as well as on the school committee. Does the town manager have any kind of input on that or thoughts? Have they been consulted about this potential committee?
I don't know. I don't think they've been consulted. I'm not sure. Generally, often it conflicts. If you're trying to get citizens, they're more available in the evening. If it's employees, they're more available during the daytime. It might not be necessary to have a representative from the light plant, the Department of Public Works, and the schools. They all kind of have the same responsibility in terms of maintaining large areas. So maybe there's a way to consolidate or something.
The other aspect is just I don't know whether the golf course personnel, you've had any communications with them and they are available or ready for this. I think it's a terrific idea. I guess I'm just a little bit concerned about how it's going to come into play because we've got an awful lot of committees. We almost need a committee to study committees, whether we can consolidate some of them and whether a sustainability committee, that this could be part of something that they're studying. Or whether a whole new committee is necessary with 9 people. I just worry that we want to make sure it's a committee that gets a lot done and that we've got the right people on it. And so I'm hopeful that we can maybe work a little bit deeper in terms of who exactly can be on this committee and whether we need to have 9 people or not. I like the idea of encompassing as many as we can, but it does create other issues. So.
I think I would agree with that. My worry is that we have another warrant article this year which creates a committee that is about sustainable landscape for different purposes, not landscape management, but how we use our land. There's an energy committee, the second follow-on committee being formed. Then this committee, I worry that, and we're having trouble with the pollinator committee. It took us a very long time to seed it with volunteers. So I'm wondering if there's an more efficient way for us to consider how to, I think the charge is correct. I think your approach is right. I think this is it's really well thought out, and I think the outcome is what we want to get to. I'm just not convinced yet that another standalone 2-year committee would be the best approach. But I'm thinking about it. I mean, I want the outcomes of this.
Yeah.
I want the stuff. It's just how to get that and what's the best way to do that.
Right. I hear you on that. And I think one thing I learned is that the ban was probably not going to get us where we wanted to go.
But we want the outcomes here.
Yeah, I think we do want the outcomes.
I think the article's a little too focused on the blowers themselves. I mean, one representative to discuss sustainable landscape design. When I saw the title of this, I was hopeful that's really the premise of what we could get the most out of Concord property, like people's sites becoming sinks for groundwater and recharge and so on. And it's really still focused on the blower. So, I mean, you could, I guess, create a group to study just equipment, but I think it's very misleading that, landscape design or biodiversity, it's one representative. And, it's only about obviously it's town-related properties, not about everyone else participating. So, they would come up with some bylaw or something just focused on what DPW can or can't do, or what the school can or can't do. But then, our neighbors and everyone together on a cul-de-sac or a community could really have a plan that makes a difference. Or the town could do something that makes our town more sustainable. Like if we're worried about leaf collection, there's some communities where I know it's gonna cost a lot, but they come and take it away for you, and you push it to the street, and a machine goes around, instead of us driving to the dump or putting leaves in our wetlands areas, which isn't really allowed, so just
Just reminding you of that.
that's what I think should be the focus, not necessarily, if it's equipment, then let's call it the Sustainable Landscape Equipment Committee.
Well, why wouldn't this be something that CSEC would take under? They've already done lawnmowers, heat pumps.
And that's okay, but don't make it sound like it's about landscape design or changing the way we see our landscaping, how we design and do things to our landscape. So like a golf course, it's all, talk about, right? So it's trying to change that notion, so you actually minimize your maintenance rather than need more horsepower.
What would be our next step? For us to mull this over?
Yeah, I think that
Are
one
you
of
looking
the
for a
things,
decision tonight? No.
I don't think we're ready to make a decision. I think we just heard from Scott what that in withdrawing the petition, this is your,
I frankly would be interested in whether you can get sort of a group that, I think you're attempting to get all sides, which is terrific, but whether you're going to be able to do that, and that, I guess, is what I would be interested in. Yes, we do have.
I can see urgent public comment.
You have to come forward.
You have to come forward and identify yourself at the microphone.
Thank you for your efforts, Scott.
You can stay, Scott.
Yeah, Scott, we're not letting go of you necessarily.
There's another chair.
Todd Stout from Perfection Landscaping. Scott and I actually worked on this together. And I think the piece that you guys are missing with all this is that, the golf course people are willing to work with us. There's a couple landscape companies in the room that want to do this. So we have the people that want to do this. Whether we meet at night or during the day, it doesn't matter. We're all owners of our own companies. And as far as the landscape sustainability that you're questioning, the landscape designers are the key to the sustainability. So if the landscape designers are designing the landscapes, the new landscapes, to maybe have a little less grass, have water collection from the gutters, so you're using rainwater instead of the irrigation water from the town, stuff like that. So it is a sustainability committee. It's not an equipment committee. The more sustainable our landscapes are, the less equipment we're going to use over time. And also, the electric's going to help, but we're still 5 to 8 years away from that. But I've talked to a couple dealers, and I've talked to some the equipment manufacturers, and they're willing to help out with this committee and give us updates and stuff like that. So I really think it's a win-win for everybody. Instead of having a band or, two sides fighting against each other, I think Scott and I and, everybody else in the room that's for this are going to work together.
Have you talked to any of the private schools who own a fair amount of land and athletic fields, that type of thing?
I have not personally, but I know.
That would be another source.
Yeah, they
of
could,
input.
that'd be part of the landscapers on the committee, because most of them sub out their maintenance. They don't do it in-house. So it's a company that's coming in and doing it, like my company or Ryan's or Mary Ann's. So having us as part of the committee, I've been working on this sustainability stuff for a while. It's just the technology's not there yet. So I just wanted to kind of put in my 2 cents that we are all working together. I don't think Scott's going to have a problem filling this committee. I think people are jumping up and down to get on it to try to push everything forward.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To answer, I did speak to Concord Academy.
Okay.
Great. Did you want to also chime in?
Mark Martinez, 66 Alfred Circle. I had, I guess, a question, and that is, really, maybe it's Carmen's question, but is this being effectively withdrawn? And if it is, that's one thing. If it cannot be effectively withdrawn, will the select board, the petitioner, let's call it the opposition, all basically either oppose any discussion or not contribute to any discussion? In other words, do we have the ability to pull a warrant article?
Well, the petitioner has pulled this warrant article. It is, however,
It's on the warrant.
on the warrant.
Anybody can move it.
So
So
somebody
the
else
answer is
could
anyone can
move
move
it.
it.
Right.
Right, so I guess
The
what I,
petitioner won't move it, but
Right.
if somebody else on the floor of town meeting decided they wish to
This
move
is our
it, they
town
could.
moderator speaking, Carmen Reese.
I guess what I'd like to ask is, I'm not sure the select board is ready to make a decision, but I think that, a number of us would like some certainty that if the issue were to come up, we all would sort of unanimously, whether it be a select board, town manager, the petitioner, say, look, we've talked about it, we think the committee is a
Right.
nice solution, and we will not support rediscussion of this topic.
We would be, if it does get moved and we followed the line of thinking that you are, the select board or whomever else would essentially recommend no action on the
Right.
motion. You can't stop the discussion at town meeting, but if it comes to a vote and our opinion is asked, we would, if following your logic, we would say, we recommend no action.
Item 11 tonight is take positions on town meeting warrant articles. Due to the open meeting law, we're not able to communicate and to say how, nobody can guarantee you now what the board's position is going to be. But if you want to stick around, you can probably find out.
If you're looking for that assurity, you'll stay to item number 11.
Hopefully by proxy. You may not see me. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah.
I have the same concerns Steve has. I think it's a great idea. In fact, I see Ryan and others in the room here, so I know you guys have been talking, that's great. It's the charge of the committee that we'd be concerned about, and whether it's a narrow charge or a broad charge, and how it might overlap with other charges. So it isn't, I don't think there's any opposition from the idea of trying to see if we can put this together and get it done, but we want to craft it in a way so that, we can bring something to town meeting at some later date and we don't run into overlap with other committees. So I think just give us some time. My other concern is whether we really want to have town employees on the committee or whether we want to have folks representing committees that work with them, like, for example, it's not really necessarily related, but if somebody from the Natural Resources Commission, maybe not one of the commissioners, but their representative.
Right.
That way it kind of spreads the workload out a little bit. You still get the point of view, but you're not making folks then do 3 and 4 meetings a night.
Did you also want to?
I did. My name is Dick Monahan. I live at 158 Hubbard Street. I was trying to read over Chris's shoulder. I apologize. I would echo, I think, what Mike said. I don't see any mention of just private citizens. I take care of my own place, and as I've said, that one of the denigrations of old age is I can't do what I used to do, so I'm out there blowing stuff instead of raking it like I used to. I think that some sort of citizen representation on the committee would bode well for whatever you come up with, point number one. Point number two, the original charge here was the leaf blowers, the annoyance of the noise and so on and so forth. And I would remind everybody that one of the real problems you run up against is that there is not a viable alternative right now, unlike other things that you've worked on or other people in the town, bottled water and so on and so forth. I'm not sure. I think the committee, a collaborative committee, is a much better way to go than a ban, and I think we ought to pursue it. But the technology may not be there yet. Doesn't mean you can say when it becomes available, this is what we ought to do and so on. But I think you should do that as well. The other thing, in my experience in business, is that when I hear talk about sustainable landscapes and so on, I can hear people saying, wait a minute, they want to take away my lawn or something like that, and it just gets bigger and bigger. And I can't help but wonder if the charge ought to be fairly narrow. You can pick this problem off in pieces, but I think there's an ability to focus and get things done better when you have a fairly focused charge as to what you want to do over the next 6 months or 12 months or whatever and so on. All the wisdom I have. Thank you for letting me read over.
To his point, when we tried to craft committees, we have tried to do 2 things. Have appropriate representation, that is, if there are people who know stuff, you're stupid not to have them on the committee. But you want general citizens there too, because it's a town phenomenon and not just people who have particular points of view. So I think we have to be careful about the way we structure it.
Right.
Can I ask one more question? To whom would this committee report? I meant to ask that. The board, the select board?
To the select board.
Okay, all right.
Yep. So I think that, what you're hearing is feedback to the initial draft, and we'll be spending a little time on it, but, thank you for taking it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we know that there are a lot of people in the room that came to hear all of this, but if anybody needs to leave now, we're on to the consent agenda. As I mean, consent calendar, not agenda. Slip of the tongue.
I'm just gonna squeeze behind that.
Good evening. So I hope you all have the draft consent calendar, okay? And the I can tell you generally, I attended all of the hearings, as well as all of the town-sponsored hearings, as well as Scott's hearing that was sponsored by Scott on his article. I've also looked back at what we've done in prior years with respect to the consent calendar. And there are a couple of things, and I invited feedback also from the town manager as well as the town treasurer.
League of Women Voters.
Yes, and the League of Women Voters, that is correct. And I would say that on this draft, I would just draw your attention to a few things. One is that I have not included Articles 14, 15, 16, and 17. And those are technically revolving funds and things, and the bond premiums, which I expect in the future will be on the consent calendar. And they have been in the past, but this year is a new procedure for handling these, a new statute, 2 new statutes actually, and a new procedure, and it just seemed to me that it was worth the limited amount of time I expect it will take to explain these new procedures to the voters, and then we are unlikely to need to revisit the new procedures again in the future, and we'll be able to handle these things which really are routine, the revolving funds and reallocation of bond premiums, and we'll be able to return those to the consent calendar. But I'm open to hearing about that if you feel that we really don't need to talk about those this year. I would, well, that was my conclusion, that we didn't, that we do need to hear about them, and if you feel that we really don't, or there's some subset of those you think we don't really need to hear about, could consider.
Carmen, was whether we could, like you had done, I think, last year, and looking at your consent calendar, it seems to me you've done the same thing, the enterprise funds, to sort of be selective about which ones of those are on the consent calendar. Like, I guess I'm just asking, and I don't really know, is there an article here, perhaps the first one, that we could use to articulate the new law, to make sure people understood it and what it meant, and then vote on that? And then unless there were questions, could, for example, if 16 was the one we talked about, and 17 was on the consent calendar, can you, I just don't remember if you can pull an article off the consent calendar.
You can pull an article, no, well, no, you can't. You have to, and this is the problem, that the consent calendar comes up right at the beginning of the meeting, and so you won't, it would be hard to know whether you wanted to pull that off the consent calendar or not, because it's new. It's not a bad idea, but it was what I struggled with as I thought about these. I don't imagine that these 4 articles will take us a lot of time. I think that the explanations are pretty straightforward. I wouldn't expect there to be an enormous number of questions about them. There weren't a lot of questions about them at the hearings, but it's still an explanation that I think people may wish to hear. So that's why I have them on the regular agenda instead of on the consent calendar. Others, I did not, in the enterprise funds, I'm going all the way to the end now, in the enterprise funds, it has been suggested to us from various quarters in past years that we rotate one or another of the enterprise funds and take them off the consent calendar so that people can hear about what's going on in that aspect of town government. And I thought that this year it would make sense to have the light plant off of the consent calendar, because I know there's been quite a bit of discussion about the expectation of increased fees and some questions about how we're doing on the sustainability goals for green energy and so forth, so that it could be good for folks to hear that presentation and to have the opportunity to ask questions of Dave Wood or whoever presents on behalf of the light plant. Similarly, the water system expenditures, I note that on your agenda this evening, you have a discussion about putting together a forum to talk about Nagog Pond, and I know that that's been in the newspaper and it's on folks' mind. It's not technically part of Article 51 on water expenditures, but I think there may be kind of a heightened interest in water expenditures that makes it worth putting that one on the regular agenda and giving folks the opportunity to ask questions about how the Nagog issue might impact water issues if they wish. So that was my thinking in taking that one off.
I think those questions are important, and Alan went to great lengths at the public hearing to try to explain. But will they be in order?
So I think the first one's in order. The first question is definitely in order, in which someone inquires about whether the current article before town meeting is impacted by what's going on in Nagog, and there might be a response that's a brief explanation, an indication that there was or will be a forum where you can learn more about that, and no, it doesn't have anything to do with this article. I think that a rabbit hole discussion on Nagog is certainly not appropriate under this article. But the first question is reasonable.
But your thought is better off to call it out and let it be.
That's my thought.
Yep.
Yeah, but I'm certainly I'm here for your feedback on this. So if you think differently, please do let me know. One that I wrestled with a bit was the Beatty Center, because the Beatty Center is having a bit of a struggle. The Beatty Center could probably use the general publicity of being in front of the meeting to say, here's the Beatty Center if you wish to join the Beatty Center. We did take them off of the consent calendar last year and have a full presentation, and no one had a question. So I'm disinclined to take it off of the consent agenda 2 years in a row. But I can see both sides of that issue, and where I came out was to put it on the consent calendar, and if someone's curious about it or someone went to the hearings and was concerned about it, they can pull it off.
Right, somebody can have it pulled off if they're concerned about it.
It is the last article of town meeting as of right now, so.
Yes, since there is no motion expected on unpaid bills, there being no unpaid bills, yes.
So,
Diane had
Is this the time to ask a question? Now, or, okay. Thank you. Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. Carmen, after lots of thinking about that particular issue.
The Beatty Center.
The Beatty Center, right. The league has talked about it, with lots of others, lots of conversations. I think the general concern is they continue to run a deficit. And I know they have money in savings to offset some of that. But I think whenever a major town facility is struggling that way, it's not unimportant for citizens to hear about that and have an opportunity to be aware of some of the struggles they're having and perhaps try to find some way to support them or, ask pertinent questions. And so I think it prudent from one perspective, I think it prudent to, even though it's at the end of the meeting and people will be tired, it seems to me a wise idea to keep it on the agenda. And if there's no comment, there's no comment. But at least it gives people an opportunity to know what's happening. So.
Sounds like there may well be a motion to remove it from the consent agenda if it's the consent calendar if it's there, but. Yeah. So you have the rest of the proposed calendar. I do have a couple things on there that are bylaws, but I think they're bylaws, but they're also kind of housekeeping things, like the alcoholic beverage bylaw amendment, which is Article 22, since really it's bringing the bylaw into conformance with a long-standing practice, so,
So this is cleanup language in many respects.
yes.
Getting this done. How does this compare with the number of articles you had on the consent calendar last year, Madam Moderator?
There are fewer articles on the consent calendar, but there's also fewer articles on the warrant.
And we've had not only the last article, the petitioner intends to withdraw, but also one other one, the dog.
Yes, so,
45.
right, there's no motion expected on Article 45, no motion expected on Article 46, and no motion on 53, unpaid bills, and typically no motion on Article 2, hearing reports.
Process question. If a different citizen chooses to move an article that we don't expect it to be moved, is that permissible since it's already printed
Yes.
in the warrant?
Yes,
So if it's some other interest of a fellow
Yes.
citizen, they can move the article.
Which is what we just discussed in terms of Article 46. Yeah.
any article that's on the warrant can be moved by anyone who's at the meeting. I mean, I suppose there might be, if someone wanted to move the article on unpaid bills, I might rule that out of order since there are no unpaid bills, but in general, if an article is on the warrant, it can be moved by anyone who's there, even if the petitioner or the original movant has chosen not to move the article.
We don't expect any bills to come in.
Don't.
A comment, in not moving an article, sometimes you have allowed, and previous moderators have allowed petitioners some time to explain why they don't want to move that.
So,
I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm wondering if a statement, not necessarily even from the petitioner, but for example, suppose the select board gets to the point of agreeing that they're going to create a committee of some kind, so that somebody could say that to town meeting for what it would be worth.
So, I would say a couple things about that. The general rule is that unless you're moving an article, you don't speak at town meeting. Exceptions have been made where the select board has asked for it. And often the exceptions the select board has asked for have been in precisely these situations where because the issue raised by a citizen petition has been addressed, and it's been addressed in cooperation with the select board, that there's an explanation of what happened and why it's not being moved. If this becomes that situation, and the select board asks me if the petitioner might make a brief statement, or if in the alternative you ask me simply to report to the meeting that the article is not being moved because the following thing is happening, we can do that as well. So either one of those things is okay with me. In general, I am not going to, as moderator, allow people who aren't moving articles to speak from the floor of the meeting. It's always been our tradition not to do that. But we have this narrow set of exceptions where the select board has asked. And I will note also that the order of the warrant will be the order in which the warrant is printed. There's nothing that will be designated as a high-interest article. Everything is equally interesting this year.
Well said.
Okay. Thank you.
So I move to approve the town meeting consent agenda as drafted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, one question. The consent agenda as drafted does not include the BD Center.
We have it on there.
It does.
It does have the BB Center on.
Oh, no, it does, I'm sorry. It includes it, so,
It's not, Article 52 is the last thing on your proposed consent agenda.
okay. All right, so we'll do it that way, and if someone wants to remove it, they may.
Someone wants to move it?
Okay.
At all.
All right, so now we are on to reviewing and potentially approving the West Concord Junction Cultural District Committee Charge, which, Chris, I see you have.
Late today, I distributed an updated version. I apologize for the delay getting that to you. Last time we discussed the West Concord Junction Village Committee, I used the word steering committee, and the board didn't favor that, so that's been eliminated. And I've underlined the other changes that I made, which was just there were some typos and other things, so I clarified those, but otherwise it looks very similar to the charge you discussed on February 21st, I think it was.
Just under membership, C, in the last full sentence before the enumeration of the committee, the committee shall be comprised of 7 members representing a diversity of interests and backgrounds.
And backgrounds. Got it?
And involved with cultural something. Or culture. Right?
Yes, involved with cultural activities.
Yes.
The only thing I didn't see in, I apologize, I didn't see your late afternoon draft, but didn't see an item in the draft that was in earlier that would mention coordination with a Concord Center cultural district, if that gets set up, and the cultural council that we already have, or any mention of the, working with,
Number 4.
Item,
is it, oh, sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
That do it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And the reporting requirements, we make mention that that will be handled by the Chamber of Commerce, because there are reporting requirements of the Cultural District Committee to the state. And the, I believe that the Chamber of Commerce said that they would do the submissions for both the cultural councils that we established, and perhaps to just
Yes.
make note of that as a coordination effort that has to, the data has to come from the cultural council to the chamber.
So I guess I was gonna ask about whether the Chamber of Commerce should be mentioned in the charge, because the role of that coordinator could potentially be different entities or what have you. I mean, it's like they're funded by something that's outside of town finances, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, are we
It's
kind
not-
of inferring that eventually, you know, there's some, I don't want that to,
It's not typical that we would refer to a third party like that, but because they were the leading agency to get the town to commit to creating a cultural district, and they've said that they would do all the heavy lifting, so to speak, and they would ask for the planning department to provide some support. We're trying to codify that, that's the understanding, that they would do most of the work of organizing events and getting the parties together and that sort of thing, and the planning staff would help, but in a secondary
Wouldn't it be
way.
item 5 on that list of duties where it talks about the chamber's role? Isn't that where we'd add Alice's point about?
Yes, preparing reports for the state, yeah.
reports?
It's
yeah,
more than
let's
supporting
make
the
sure
chamber,
we
it's-
list those responsibilities that'll be expected of them to perform. I think that's important.
It's more than supporting the chamber and its efforts, it's to codify that the chamber will be the
Is going to
the
be doing
legal
it.
entity
And I think
reporting
that's-
the data to the state, data to be provided by the cultural committee. Cultural district. Cultural district committee.
Say
As
that
opposed to
5
the
times
cultural
fast.
council.
So do I hear a motion?
I move to approve the West Concord Junction Cultural District Committee charge as revised.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Now we are at review, discuss or approve of the Nagog Pond intermunicipal agreement.
Yes.
We're being joined by,
Peter Durning has represented the Public Works Department in the town on the Nagog Pond matter, including the appeal of the special permit with the conditions that were imposed and so forth. So, Peter, why don't you take it over?
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm happy to speak to you tonight. I believe in your packets you received a copy of the intermunicipal agreement that will be before you to approve tonight. I thought it would be helpful if we walked through some of the highlights of how that agreement operates, and I can take questions that you may have about that. So just walking through it, the version that you got is still a draft. There are 3 elements that are missing. Exhibit A and Exhibit B are both missing. And also there's a reference to a volume that I believe in your version is listed as to be determined, and that is still the subject of some negotiation, but I'll review that later. Walking through the sections and just highlighting some important points. In Section 1, the intermunicipal agreement does not take effect unless and until Acton Town Meeting approves a warrant article at Acton's annual town meeting. And that was written in at the request of Acton, and although the towns will approve and adopt it, it will, pursuant to this provision, not take effect if Acton Town Meeting votes down that article. On a related matter in Section 2 addresses the tolling period, so how and when this agreement goes into effect. And it says that the initial term of the agreement will be 20 years, and that will be automatically extended for a second 5-year term for a total of 25 years. And this was designed to comply with the statutory restriction on intermunicipal agreements in General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 4A. Though the agreement does contemplate that the parties may renew it for a subsequent round of a 20 and 5-year term, the term of the agreement itself is a maximum of 25 years. In Section 2AI, the initial 20-year period of the agreement does not start until Concord has a final unappealed special permit for the water treatment plant and the intake pipe. And the importance of that I just highlight for you, as opposed to the IMA taking effect when the warrant article goes into effect, but the tolling period not until Concord gets its water special permit for the water treatment plant. And that would be, as we'll discuss shortly, there are some obligations that are imposed on both towns that we would want to start right as the agreement is entered, but giving Concord a full allowance for having an unappealed permit before the initial 20-year term commences. In Section 3, Concord agrees to continue to provide water to its existing customers in what is described as Concord's 2A service area. And those are all the current customers who are currently receiving Concord water. In Section 3B, Concord agrees to provide water service to new and expanded uses on parcels within Concord's 2A service area that do not front on Acton Water District mains. And in this area is where what would that total commitment be that was listed as a to be determined year agreement. And I believe the final agreed volume is going to be 61,000 gallons per day. And that 61
above the current flow or all up?
Yes, Michael, that'll be all. So the current flow is about 38,000, and so it's an allowance for about another 23 for new and expanded uses in that area. Section 3C is a statement of uniform treatment for all customers, whether they be Acton or Concord customers. 4A is within the agreement referred to as the forbearance agreement, and that is that the Acton Board of Selectmen will agree to forbear from taking certain actions, and that would be seeking or actively supporting an authorization from the general court, the state legislature, to withdraw water from Nagog Pond, petitioning the general court to modify or amend the terms of the 1884 Act, from seeking a judicial determination that would constrain Concord's rights under the 1884 Act, for applying for a Water Management Act permit seeking authorization to withdraw water from Nagog Pond. And one thing to keep in mind, the forbearance agreement is specifically designed to apply to the Acton Board of Selectmen. By its terms, it does not apply to the Acton Water District.
Nor to private citizens or a citizen group in Acton, I assume.
That is correct, Tom.
Who has the authority in Acton to apply for water from Nagog? Does that fall to the Board of Selectmen, or is that a water district?
There are some questions, Michael, that I think it might be easier for me to address in a non-public session, but the short answer would be, I believe either entity could, the town or the water district could. In Section 4B, Acton agrees to pursue and support amendments to its zoning bylaw and other planning tools to ensure that new and expanded uses along in Concord's 2A service area submit plans and a water demand analysis to the Concord DPW and receive written approval from Concord DPW before Acton may issue any zoning, planning, building permits, special permits, variances, or approvals. And that's really just there to make sure both towns know what is occurring so that plans can go forward appropriately and no new plan is going over the cap.
So, Mr. Durning, so in that statement, say there's a plan to tap into the 61,000 gallons per day, Concord's DPW can rule on that application, or is it more just a heads up?
It is more of a heads up. I think the concern would be, Steve, if a projected use was going to go over that. But if it was within the allowance, then there's not some new discretion given to Concord to review that.
Thank you.
In 5A, there are several specified determination triggers. And is written to give Concord an option to terminate if any of these are hit. It's not automatic. There's still some discretion left to Concord to determine if it decides that because one of these events has occurred, if it will terminate the agreement and terminate service to the Concord 2A service area. Those triggers are Acton ending its forbearance as provided in Section 4A. If legislation is introduced in the general court seeking authorization for Acton or Littleton to withdraw water from Nagog Pond, to modify the terms of the 1884 Act, or to otherwise restrict Concord's rights to withdraw water from Nagog Pond.
Does that call out the Board of Selectmen? Or does it make just a?
I believe that it does. I believe it just says the town of Acton.
I don't remember.
Seeking authorization for Acton.
For Acton, and
Anyone doing that?
I believe that refers to the town. I believe that refers to the town of Acton. So it would be the. Correct. Not individuals. For example, in Section 3, it says either Acton or the Acton Water District applies for or Littleton secures a Water Management Act permit authorizing withdrawal of water from Nagog Pond. And in that one, Acton Water District is specifically called out. And the fourth termination option, Concord's water supply from Nagog Pond is materially compromised due to statutory, regulatory, operational, environmental, or Acton zoning or general bylaw changes. Again, for any one of those triggers, the discretion rests with Concord to decide what its next step would be. Section 5B governs what would occur if Concord elects to terminate. Notice is given of a date of termination which cannot be less than 1 year from the date of termination. So the water service in the 2A service area would continue for a year. Section 6 addresses increased regional planning and coordination, where the representatives of the towns agree to work with each other, meet with each other, and work cooperatively in the event of water emergencies. And one more to highlight in Section 7 states that the agreement does not diminish, limit, or advance the parties' respective rights under the 1884 Act. Those are the basic parameters of the intermunicipal agreement. Are there any further questions for me on that at this time?
Just for me, not as a lawyer, you're satisfied, obviously, you wouldn't, that we're protected as well as we can be. And
I am, Michael, and I would add, I believe it's been communicated back, but the Public Works Commissioners reviewed it and have endorsed it and recommended it to this board.
And you're looking for action tonight? There's some timing involved.
Yes, what I would recommend would be a resolution of the board authorizing Jane as chair to execute and for you to execute the agreement on behalf of the town of Concord in a version substantially similar to the one that you've reviewed. If for some reason there are suggested further edits and what is the ultimate agreement is not substantially similar to this, then we would have to come back. But in the anticipation that the final agreement should be substantially similar to this, but for the final inclusion of Exhibit A and Exhibit B and the term of the gallons per day at 61, I think I'd be very comfortable having that recommended.
Peter, there are a lot of people who are probably watching on TV who don't know the backstory. Has Acton already signed this agreement, or what is their Board of Selectmen doing?
The Acton Board of Selectmen is meeting tonight, and they're discussing the agreement in a public session. And I believe their intention is to come to a very similar resolution to the one I articulated.
And then this goes to the Acton town meeting. April 2nd?
Yes, that's correct. Town meeting warrant article has been written authorizing the town to enter this agreement.
Any further discussion from the board?
just thanks to Peter.
Thank you, Mike. And I will stick around.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
There is a draft motion.
I would move to authorize the chair and the town manager to enter into an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Acton for the purposes of Nagog Pond water supply, substantially as drafted, and to authorize the town manager and town council to make minor changes as they may be necessary.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So now, strangely enough, we're talking about scheduling a public forum on Nagog Pond issues.
So, and I had originally been thinking that we would want to try to get this done before town meeting convenes on April 9th, and perhaps we now have more time, and we could look at doing this 30 days from now. So it isn't, you're meeting again next week. It isn't necessary. Perhaps it'd be helpful to find out how Acton voted this evening and where things stand before
Maybe we don't
scheduling
need to
that
make that
event.
call tonight.
Right.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay.
I think the idea of holding a public forum on Nagog is important for us to do, and I think that would be, don't want to lose sight of getting that on.
It was helpful that Alan Cathcart went into some detail on the history. I think the history is interesting and why the town feels this is an important resource that we want to protect and that sort of thing. I think it'd be helpful to provide that information to the public, but I don't think we need to scramble to make it happen before town meeting.
Well, I think it's going to be important to make sure that we pick a time when we can really gather people, because I do think that this is a subject that has a wide range of information available on it. And I think it's useful to everybody in town to think about our long-range water plan, period.
Thank you.
So we are on to 2229 Main Street reuse plan process.
So I suggested, we talked a little bit about doing a planning process for 2229 Main Street when the committee submitted a request for funds and for planning. But we were awarded a technical assistance grant by the EPA, and I think they're hoping to work out an agreement with the town as to how that would work. So that came a little faster than we thought. It was discussed just a month ago in concept, and then before we knew it, we had been awarded. So it seemed to me, we had a preliminary conversation about not having the existing 2229 Main Street Committee, which is a technical review board for the cleanup, and have a different group with some planning expertise and perhaps some members from that committee to look into the planning process. So we're coming back to this sooner than we originally thought. We thought originally it would be after town meeting, see how town meeting votes on the appropriation of funds, but we now have this award from EPA that we should determine, who best should work with EPA to discuss that. So, and Pam, I don't know if you're prepared to speak or if you have any thoughts on that.
Prepared to speak? I was prepared to listen, but I'm glad to answer questions.
I know you're not shy. I know this project better than anyone.
Pam Rockwell, 1810 Main Street. So I think that basically EPA provides a contractor. They selected the contractor. The contractor has worked at a whole bunch of different other sites, and they submitted a work plan for phase 1, which would be to learn about the site and maybe to hold to get together enough to hold a public meeting in, they said June or September. I think September makes better sense for most of us. Their preliminary version of this did not include things like taking into account the comprehensive long-range planning that's already been done in the site. It's a cookie-cutter plan that could have been used at any of their other sites, too. So that's something to think about. I think for that reason, we still want to be having our own contractor do this, whether we would really spend $25,000 or not. I'm not sure whether that's necessary. The Finance Committee seemed to think $25,000 wasn't a lot of money to run a project like this. I actually think somebody really creative who would be strong about telling this contractor what to do could manage to actually use this contractor to do most of the work. So I would still think that we would want to be in charge of that process. I do think we want to enter into this agreement with EPA and take advantage of this contractor. I think we'd like to move their schedule back another month at least, so that we're not doing that in this month while we're actually preparing for town meeting. So, but was there any other questions about that?
So I think one of the next steps would be to create a committee charge for,
Right.
I think a short-term planning committee. They won't go on forever necessarily, but to develop some kind of a plan for the use of the 2229 Main Street if the town
Develop
were
a
to
charge
come
and
to
a,
fruition.
and a list of who we might want on the committee. Yep.
Yep. Okay,
So maybe we can have that ready, who knows, maybe even by next week.
we'll try. Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now to the exciting point in the night. We get to take positions on town meeting warrant articles. Something we've managed to put off until the very last second. Or,
Put it off, I think
Well,
we'd
I-
rather put it off.
you're so right. That's true, but
So just a process question, Jane. So we have tonight's meeting, and then we have,
No, we
have
have
to
to
get
deliver
done-
your recommendations to the
So they go
printer
to
tomorrow by
printers.
noon.
right, so this is it.
So this is it. And
That was the,
put
It
your
was-
feet up, get some hot chocolate.
I did bring cookies, just so that everybody knows.
Where are they?
They're in.
So on, there is a page, Andrew,
sorry,
this
I'm sorry, I
handout we
apologize.
got, it has, X's already?
That's for FinCom.
Okay, those are
This is,
FinCom
the FinCom
findings?
committee's recommendations.
Okay,
On the first page of the key and then the board for changes.
so let's go. Article 1. I guess no action from FinCom, so.
Choose 10 officers. Well, I don't think we're not in favor. I think that we are.
Move affirmative action on Article 1.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I move affirmative action on Article 2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Move affirmative action on Article 3.
All in favor?
Second.
Oh, sorry.
Aye.
Second and I.
Move affirmative action on Article 4.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Move affirmative action on Article 5.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 6.
You'll need an amount, in the amount of,
Need
I
a amount of,
I have to get my,
think it's a
Million.
million. I think it's a million. Yeah.
Does it, say 1 million?
$1 million, I believe.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
aye. Except we're missing an aye.
I said aye.
Are you and I?
Abstaining.
You're abstaining. Okay.
I move affirmative action on Article 7. Is the amount correct in the article?
The amount in the warrant is correct, is the same? No, it isn't. We increased the guideline.
The finance director's memo.
Number 7.
What is that number?
Hold on.
Is,
I move affirmative action on Article 7 in the amount of $43,223,870.
Second.
587.
Oh,
587.
Second.
So
The
it's
second.
Not correct in the FinCom.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 8.
That needs an amount?
do you have an amount?
I think it's
We don't,
in the-
we don't have,
I don't think we have it.
there's not resolution between the FinCom, the FinCom offered a number? Okay.
On the regional, Minuteman?
Well, didn't Kerry present us with
It's
the number?
listed in the.
They approved, they
700,
voted in favor, so I would think it's what's in the warrant.
which is 752,938.
Change.
Oh,
I think it was in the draft motions.
Okay.
Yeah, I have the number here.
You have them?
So I move affirmative action on Article 8 in the amount $742,649, which includes both a debt service and an operations amount.
I'm sorry, repeat that last sentence?
Which includes $595,752,000 for operations and $146,887 for debt service. That's how you get to the 7.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Okay, so,
I would like to wait and see what the school committee is able to do for the school budget.
9, 10, 12, 13.
Yes.
yep,
Recommendation will be at town meeting? Is
Yeah.
that-
yes,
That's what you're
so that would be 9 through,
That's for
13. yep. Can we do a,
Got a motion, I'll second it. Motion for no action.
well, reporting at town
I
meeting,
think we're
Yeah.
gonna
11?
yeah,
defer
defer until town meeting,
till town meeting.
right?
Is that number still the same?
The finance director's asking about 11, is that,
Yeah.
that's their capital projects, that's not the driveway. So that's 900, in the amount of 900,000, I think there's support for that, so for the
We
FinCom.
can vote for.
Oh, so we can vote for
11.
11. So we're talking, right now, we're talking about 9, 10, and
12, 13.
12, 13.
All right, so then I move affirmative. Do we have the correct amount in the warrant
Why don't we do this
for
first?
Article 11?
Yes.
Finance director says yes.
Okay,
Are you going to make a motion on that one, Mike?
I will, since I can get my
100,000?
fat fingers to
Is it even?
go over to 11.
That's correct.
I move affirmative action on Article 11 in the amount of $900,000.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we have to go back to doing the 9, 10, 12,
9, 10,
I move,
12, and 13, reporting at town meeting.
yes.
yes. So now we're at,
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
No, she can't,
Oh,
you need to move, right? She can't make a motion.
I can't make a
That's
motion.
fair, right?
I move to make our recommendations on Article 11, 12, 13, and 14 at town meeting.
9,
9 and 10, 12 and 13.
12 and 13, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye. good job.
Yeah. All right.
I move affirmative action on Article 14.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
15.
I move affirmative action on Article 15.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 16.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Move affirmative action on Article 17.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Article 18 is Mr. Grom's motion,
Yes.
allowing 17-year-olds to vote in town elections. I move affirmative action on Article 18.
Second.
I think I have to recuse myself since my daughter spoke to it.
You do?
No, I'm kidding. That was a joke. I still have to go home. So that was a second? All in favor?
We should have a discussion, shouldn't we?
Well, if you want.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So a 17-year-old gets the right to vote,
In town matters,
doesn't have access or cannot become a committee member,
correct?
cannot participate in any, they just come to town meeting,
Or the town elections.
town elections, and then it's kind of just like a one-year deal. They're off to college, or some will stay, but I don't understand why.
Involved at an earlier stage.
Well, you can
gives them a stake in
participate,
the
but you're
process.
given that access to have that right to vote, and you're not participating, really.
I think you're participating just as much as most citizens.
I would actually suggest that it will encourage the participation that right now is rarer amongst 17-year-olds than you would find at town meeting or in the local elections, because this is not about federal elections or state elections.
Do we have a policy that would preclude a teenager from serving on a committee in the town?
Typically, it's registered voters,
Yeah.
but
Not just
otherwise, but an
citizens.
18-year-old, 19-year-old could.
We've
So,
never
but
said
registered voters-
We've only said citizens in the
Yeah,
past.
fair enough.
And they are citizens of a community. I would think, unless there's something that explicitly precludes them from participating, young people, teenagers have served on school committee members.
That's
as
true, yeah.
alternatives. They have been on other groups, so I'm not convinced that that's not open to them.
I think it is written that way, though.
Is it?
Is it?
So,
Mr. Grom?
Tell me, what is it written as? I'm sorry.
Articles,
Are you talking about the article itself?
article
Right.
itself.
And you're saying, I'm thinking more about the town's policies towards teenagers being able to participate on committees. Tell me, Steve, what are you referencing in the article? Any citizen 17 years or older, so long as they're a resident.
It would be interesting to me, I think the point, I don't think it says anything in the warrant article, but I guess a question that I wish I had asked was if they can serve on committees, can they serve on statutory, committees that have statutory responsibility?
Right, i.e. the state, right? Since they're not,
Well, like the NRC
A
or
planning board or
planning
Board of
board or
Appeals.
ZBA.
Forest commissioner, but a polystyrene committee maybe.
Oh, I understand. I think they would be able to serve on all kinds of committees, but the question would be if they could serve on committees that have
Other
state statutory.
The way I read this is they just wouldn't be able to be on the select board.
Generous reading, Tom.
I don't know, we have an election coming up. Write-in candidates.
but that's fine. I just wanted to bring it up.
So, tell me, are you concerned because if they're
Well,
not.
it's just from a practical standpoint, I think the role, someone at that particular age may use their right to vote at that age, which is fine. I think that it's a concern to me. It's just it's like a 1 year, maybe 2, and then you may just kind of move on, or do you have the time to participate in committees and so on? We talk about scheduling for them and so on with school life, but I'm fine. I mean, the board seems supportive. I would be inclined to defer to
You
support.
make good points, and I think.
Yeah.
So it's been moved and seconded. Call for a vote?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 19.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move no action on Article 20.
Second.
I'm sorry, on 19, the request is for $600,000.
$5 figure?
Broken in two parts, 400,000 and 200. Sorry.
Do we need to
I move affirmative action on Article 19 in the amount of $600,000.
Second.
all in favor?
Which one are we now? I'm sorry.
We're just repeating.
19, okay.
Number.
Yes, so I vote yes. Aye.
All right. Article 20?
I move no action on Article 20.
Second.
Well, I would vote not in favor of that. I think it's a poorly thought-out motion to reverse the town manager's decision. I don't think that that's something that I would be in favor of.
That you would be or would not be?
I would not, I think
You're not in
I'm
favor of
not
the
in
article.
favor of the
Right.
article.
Rather than no action, he would
That's what
So
I-
rather than
Rather
no
than no
action,
action,
I'm
yeah.
actually not in favor.
not,
That's the
So
term,
that no
that's the term
action
we
means
use.
not in favor.
Okay, we've got two
I don't know, yeah, I don't
categories here,
understand.
so.
Oh,
I'm not sure why we have not in favor as a
Category.
category.
Then no action I'm happy with, if that's the reading
That's our-
of it.
Yes,
That's like
That's our
encouraging
term.
a no vote.
Yeah, yes.
yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move affirmative action Article 21.
I think those from you.
Second?
Do we need a dollar figure on that?
You do, and the amount is
2.6.
2.6.
I'm sorry.
In the
repeat that.
amount,
21,
in the amount
2.6.
of,
I'm sorry?
On 21?
With 2.6?
2.6, and I move affirmative action Article 21 in the amount $2.6 million.
Second?
Um, I
Your
don't
call.
think
Your call.
I don't think we usually, I actually,
You might want to get through all of these and
Yeah.
hear comments at the end if someone wants to comment on.
okay, great. So back to the
I recommend
2.6 million.
affirmative action on Article 22.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I recommend no action on Article 23.
Second.
Why is that, Mike? Just asking.
Because I think we have, we passed last year at town meeting the Energy Futures Task Force. We'd articulated with accepting that committee's responsibility, we intended to put a second committee in place, which Alice talked about earlier today. And I think even when we had the folks here talking about leaf blowers and sustainability, we've got a new sustainability director. I think part 2 of this Energy Futures Task Force can pick up the issue of sustainability. I think the leaf blower was a specialized case, but we had that discussion. We didn't want to get too thinly put. And so I think we've already charted a course for how we're going to structure committees to deal with this issue. And I don't think this article really paid much attention to what we had done in the past or what we are planning to do in the future. So the idea of sustainability is a great one, but I think we'd articulated a different path. So
Yeah, agree.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. You know, having sat as the liaison to the Public Works Commission, much of the work in resiliency planning resides with the Public Works Department, and they are actively engaged in climate mitigation and resiliency planning. They're active participants in the MAPC Magic subgroup
Absolutely.
on resiliency planning, and they just finished a 120-page document that outlines structurally what you might do to mitigate and to form a more resilient community. And I think most of that work is laid out and falls within the jurisdiction, I think, of the Public Works, and maybe also CSAC can pick up
CSAC.
pieces of the more land planning kind of issues that might come up. But I don't see the need for another committee just to do resiliency planning.
well, and I think the petitioner would, my view, the petitioner would have been better off if they'd have talk to these various committees that already existed and try to craft something or understand it, so I
Agreed.
agree.
Yeah,
I was
no,
thinking
thank
about
you. I
the
just
magic
wanted to,
process.
you know,
No,
hopefully I
I'm
was.
sympathetic to the goal, but I think
Yeah.
the result is going to have unintended consequences of maybe just
Right.
adding confusion. So
Agreed.
I would second the no action.
Okay?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 24 in the amount of $247,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 25 in the amount of $2,500,000.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Before I make a motion on Article 26, Chris, what do I have to say?
If you don't take any exceptions with the recommended appropriations, then
Bottom
favorable
line
action with the bottom line, which does include an additional $500,000 for the Commonwealth Ave property.
It does or does not?
It does.
It does, so it's just a 1.8, okay. So I move affirmative action on Article 26 in the amount of $1,861,038.
I have a problem with a couple of the items that have been selected, and particularly item E, the Masonic Corporation. So while I'm sympathetic with most of the others, I guess I would not be in favor of that one in terms of authorizing all of the funds.
Can you describe your concern?
Yeah, I think these funds should be for the general public. I don't think the Masonic Lodge is something that the general public uses or has access to or has any interest in particularly. I'm also a bit concerned regarding the recent decision in the Acton case. I think that this might slip under in that it's being used for restoration of the building, but the Masonic Masons, I don't know enough about what I've read up on them. There doesn't seem, historically, they are only for Christians. They don't have other religions that can be members of the lodge. And they also, at one point, didn't allow women members. So I just have I don't see what the interest of the town of Concord is in spending this money to restore the lodge. I know there's been a lot of items get under the historic notion, but that to me is not the most persuasive aspect. So, and there's nothing, once we give the money, there's nothing that says they can't go ahead and sell the lodge to a private person. So there are no kind of restrictions that go along with our funding of some of these private entities.
Interesting.
But the CPA has approved funding for, say, religious structures or
I was
things like
against
that.
those as well.
Oh, okay, well, Tom's consistent.
No, that is what the Acton decision, the recent Acton decision
Gotcha.
is about, is whether public
I
funds
think
can
when
vote to
I
support
think the
religious
church
institutions.
was it last year that the church?
Acton?
Yeah.
Or,
No, Concord.
Concord,
The
over
steps.
for doing the steps,
Yeah.
So
right?
the difference was that was steps to a building, and the Acton decision really resided in the restoration of stained glass
Right.
windows that had iconic images of faith.
But the steps to the building, again, I mean, my feeling was that is not open to the public.
Oh, it is.
Well, there was a sense that it was, but I don't know of any organization that has utilized it, and I don't think the CPA does a particularly good job of following up to make sure that it is used or it's advertised to be used and the public benefits from it.
I did say in response to this kind of question, I think, at the hearing, that they did, I've forgotten the details, so I'm a little reluctant, but they did make it available for public events.
In the case of the church?
No.
No, in
Oh,
terms
so
of the Masonic
yeah,
Lodge. Yeah, there was discussion about opening their doors to anyone that wanted to use them, but it doesn't get to the historic use that Tom's bringing up.
As far as the historical landscape of Concord Center,
Yeah.
Right. It's hard to separate the use of the historic use of that physical building and the importance of that physical building. And that's the,
Well, I come down in support of the Community Preservation Committee. They wrestled with this.
No, I think
get
they
it.
do a terrific job. It's just a philosophical difference I have with them, so.
I get it. I get it.
so we would vote with one,
Yeah.
one no
I
action.
don't think
on-
so. And the way this works is, my recollection is this article will come up. They'll go over all of the allocations, and people can call
You can pick-
individual
you raise your
items
hand.
out. So
right.
it isn't like you have to, we don't do that here. But at town meeting, somebody could call any one of the particular allocations out, and we could have a discussion about it.
Right.
So again, I move affirmative action on Article 26.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye,
You want me to take over, Mike?
sure.
Okay.
All against?
Yeah, you can.
That was 4-1?
Yeah, that's great. That's fine. Article 27, I move affirmative action on Historic Districts Map Amendment for Hubbardville Extension.
Second.
Can I have a little bit of discussion on this one? Sure. So the idea of adding the historic home to the historic district makes a lot of sense to me. My only, and this is a very old home, it's the Abel Wheeler house. My only question is the timing of this and whether it's appropriate. The home is under a demolition review process right now. And can we include it in a historic district, which would then change the asset to the owner under the conditions that the owner has requested? Is that fair game? I'm not clear.
Well,
I'm
I know there was
puzzling
some
you.
discussion about whether, if a demolition permit had been applied
Right.
for
Yeah.
before town meeting votes on this, would that building be exempt from the demolition
That's the
delay?
question.
And my understanding is, council feels there may be an argument for, I don't think the permit was pulled. Perhaps if the permit was in hand, then
No,
this.
it's
this
under
might-
review still. It's
So
under,
I think this bylaw may very well apply to that structure, whereas I had thought that it would not. The exchange that I saw between the planning department and council indicated it may apply,
So
the
if this
demolition
were
delay
approved,
may
it-
apply.
At town meeting.
if this were approved at town meeting, it would mean that that property could not be demolished. Is that what you're saying?
It could
Because that's
be
what the-
covered under the demolition.
It's already under a demolition
Already
review
under.
process now. It's under a delay. We heard a lot of,
That site was on the list
Right.
of.
it's a historic property. We heard from former owners, the Wheeler family. I just want
So
to make sure that
then it's my understanding they would be required, based on just an email, we'll get guidance from town council at town meeting, but that the expectation was that the district protections would apply. So they'd have to deal with the district, the Historic District Commission, which may grant approval to demolish all or a portion of the building, but the property owner would have to
It
deal
makes
with
sense
it.
for us then to wait.
Perhaps it's,
Get,
I just feel like
originally the assumption was it wouldn't apply, that the demolition permit
Right.
would be grandfathered and it wouldn't apply.
I'd
And now
like-
it seems
I'd like
the
to-
point
And then
of
if-
including it in the district, if the house is not
If
going
it's
to
gone, right.
survive
If
the
it was
decision.
demolished, it would be held, the site would be under
Yeah.
review by
Right.
Historic District. So
It's
whatever
already
was,
under review by the Historic District Commission. It has already, no, the Historical
Historical
Commission.
Historical
Right.
Commission.
It came to the Historical Commission that imposed a one-year delay after hearing a good deal of discussion from family members about the historical significance of the home.
The other issue, I guess, is there liability if it does pass and does, I mean, it clearly would diminish the value to the owner at a time, you know, sort of, there is a fairness issue in here that I'm a little troubled with, I must say. And I'd be interested in town council whether, I mean, even if it does apply and becomes historic, is there still then a liability on the part of the town for the taking of the property in that fashion?
Well, I'll withdraw the motion and we'll get some town council.
Yeah.
As I started reading more, it became, I just wanted to make sure that we are on firm footing. It is a historic property. There is no doubt about it. It has cultural and historical significance. The quality of the architecture is significant.
But it wasn't put in
For
at the
some reason,
time
it
that
wasn't.
the others were.
Right, and many of the neighboring properties
Yeah.
are part of the
it.
historic district. This one, for some reason, wasn't.
Yeah.
It was the surviving farm of the Concord's farm fields. That was the home in Concord. So I don't know why it was left off,
Yeah.
you know, whenever, how many years ago the historic district was drawn.
I think like
whether that was an error.
1998 or 99. I mean, it was a long time ago.
I don't know.
So in terms of position on this article, do we want to wait?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we
Why don't we wait?
And I also have the concern that, you know, there's the district, and then I don't know anything about the property. But why that house and why not
Others are,
others around there? And
There was an extensive discussion at the hearing, so that, yeah.
so, I mean, I think that, so I'd want to make sure.
Hopefully
we have heard
CCTV
from
will
council.
replay that.
Yep.
So this is being
it's
proposed
complicated.
by the Historic Districts Commission, right?
Yes.
And the PowerPoint, I think we saw this. Oh, yeah, it was built in 1829. Yeah, I can't tell you why.
it was left off.
How many of the other houses
Right.
in the neighborhood are on the district? It's across the street from other homes in the historic district. So I don't know.
So do I hear a motion to, or,
I'll withdraw the motion.
I think we should wait.
Well,
Sorry.
just, the motion would be instead that we'll make our recommendation
Or
at town
town
meeting, right?
Second that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I move affirmative action on Article 28, appropriate funds for 2229 Main Street, redevelopment in the amount of $25,000.
Now, do we still need that if we have the TAG grant?
I think we should.
That's in addition
So,
to.
second, yeah, I think we should
Yeah.
still do it.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 29 to accept Mass General Laws, C90, I don't know all this, 17, limiting traffic speed.
And that's limiting to 25 miles an hour
settled.
on designated
Please
streets.
Please
Yep.
settle areas.
Yes.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 30, bylaw amendment to prohibit all types of non-medical marijuana establishments as defined in Mass General Laws 94G-1.
I may be the one in this one as well, but I am not in favor of
let me
that.
second it first, so we got it.
There's a second, okay.
Why is that, Tom?
I don't think, I mean, I think that we, first of all, don't even know fully what the regulations are that the Cannabis Commission is going to be putting out.
Well, did they come out? They were supposed to come out on the 15th. They did. They did, okay.
And I think there's a strong likelihood that we're going to be deferring until December 31st anyway. There's another warrant article to do that. And I don't see the rush to say no. I think let's see what the regulations come out. I'm also not convinced that the basis of it, that somehow having illegal, unregulated marijuana is safer than having legal, regulated marijuana. And I would far prefer to see regulated marijuana.
You mean, well, because we have, marijuana is legal regardless of whether,
It's where you're going to buy it.
Right,
It's
so you're talking
But my point is that they're saying, the argument that is saying we should not have it in town is somehow
Marijuana
that,
establishments in town,
yes,
right.
is somehow that is going to lead to many more people using because it's going to be available here, whereas if it's not available here, I'm not sure that that the illegal market is going to dry up. I think people are still going to be using the illegal market, and I'd prefer to see the legal market available.
Should we
Even
put
if you
this
had a
off?
legal market, that doesn't mean the illegal market wouldn't also.
There might be
flourish.
some, but it certainly would be a great deal less, particularly if you've got funds to do education.
Well, the
which-
economist in me says it's probably a matter of price.
Well, no, I don't know about that. I think Tom has a point, because if you're a legal business that's selling the product
Right.
in town, and there's someone doing something that isn't within town regulations, you're almost the policing factor, just like Airbnbs in town. It's folks are checking up on people trying to advertise Airbnb because it doesn't comply with the town zoning bylaws that someone's reporting them, probably your hospitality industry in town. So
Do you know where the discussion on the state's end of, because I know the governor came out against a number of, for instance, the
Consumption.
non-medical marijuana, the non-site based.
He opposed consumption, on-site consumption.
Right.
Right.
So, no, I don't know what,
And that was not part of the new regulation, and my understanding is also delivery.
And that was the
is
other
not
question,
going to
is
be-
the
Internet
Amazon-like.
Right.
Right.
That was not part.
so I'm sympathetic to your point, but I have to say, there is nothing that, I think when we asked and heard presentations from legal counsel at public forums, that a vote against allowing establishments now does not preclude us coming back to town meeting next year to opt in, once we understand what the rules and regs are that towns would be committing to. It's difficult for me to vote to allow marijuana establishments in town without fully understanding what's in and what's out of those regs. I would prefer knowing before I commit my vote to know what are we agreeing to. And I know the draft regs came out a couple of days ago.
Right.
There are a public hearing process that has to ensue before the regs are finalized. So I'm personally uncomfortable with approving something that I don't know what I'm approving.
I
I
agree
think
with
the
you.
other issue that, I mean, I agree, but I think the other issue that is just, we have the town surveys every year, and it's pretty clear what people say, schools, town character, taxes, what. And I think of town character, and whether or not these kind of establishments are in keeping with the town character as we've come to know it. And I know town characters evolve over time and all of that.
I was going to say, we don't get into that discussion when we're talking about liquor licenses, and I'm not sure whether that goes along with the town character or not.
But we do, and I remember the very first one I was on the board with was in fact just about that, and that's exactly what was talked about, was town character. And in fact, it was turned down, as I recall. You and I were the only, we voted yes, as I remember.
Yeah.
But I think it was you and Carmen and
at least we're
At
against
least
it.
voters
Right.
voted no, and it got turned down. So I think we do consider those.
Yeah, that was, I remember that.
And so the health issues are
Yeah.
one thing. I think it's, that you can debate that. And this doesn't preclude anyone from exercising the right as an individual that they voted for. So
Well,
I guess I'm with Alice. I think no until we really understand it deeply. And still, we'd have to think about whether this is something we want to have in town. But I'm willing to have that debate a little bit later when we really know
Yeah.
what it
No,
is we're buying.
Yeah,
So for now-
yeah, I'm convinced more from Alice's point that I think we don't know what the regulations are.
Right.
So I kind of don't want to leave the door open for whatever the state may offer, and then we have to pull it back then. So
And keep in mind that the vote at town meeting, should this, it's the term of art's been the opt-out, pass, we still have to pass the exact same language at the ballot. So that's two steps, in a sense, to create one of the, something that would be in place at least until next year for town meeting. It might be there, period, but I'm saying, if it passed at town meeting,
If a vote to prohibit.
Prohibit.
Establishments in Concord passes town meeting.
right, and passes at the ballot,
Yeah.
as you pointed out, there would be an opportunity to take another look at this at town meeting next year
And opt in,
and opt in.
once we know what the rules are.
So,
At least that's what we heard from, when the question was asked of town.
Right.
Council.
Right.
And presented at public hearing.
it doesn't mean it would happen, but it is an option.
It's
Right.
possible to opt in. Now those rules could change too, I don't know.
Well, the point that I think everybody's brought up is right now the rules are very, very nebulous. I mean, they're,
Don't know.
Haven't gone through public hearing.
Right.
yeah, we don't know what they are. Okay. Did I get a second?
You did.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
One against.
Okay.
Article 31, I move affirmative action to accept Mass General Law 64N3 and adopt a 3% local sales tax on marijuana products.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
If we're gonna have it,
Let's
we ought to
check.
make some money.
That's right.
As the economist across from you might say.
Article 32, move affirmative action for zoning bylaw amendment for marijuana establishment moratorium extension.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And this is an extension to December 30th.
Right now, our current
Moratorium.
moratorium ends the
Yep.
July 31st.
Right.
Yep.
Article 33, I move affirmative action on Article 33, zoning bylaw amendment for the definition of a dwelling unit.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 34, a zoning bylaw amendment, height of accessory buildings.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 36, the zoning bylaw amendment for reconstruction of non-conforming structures. Oh, I'm sorry, 35. I move affirmative action on Article 35, zoning bylaw amendment, combined business residence.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 36, the zoning bylaw amendment for reconstruction of non-conforming structures.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 37, a zoning bylaw amendment, off-street parking, loading, and design standards.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 38, zoning bylaw amendment for site plan review.
Second.
Second, I was just wondering what the consent calendar, I was just reviewing it, that's housekeeping too, isn't it?
All in favor?
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 39, a zoning bylaw amendment, site plan for religious uses, educational uses, and child care facilities.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Article 40, I move affirmative, wait a second.
Those are
This is the one that's by petition.
There's a petition article.
Yep.
I missed the hearing on this.
Well, let me make the motion first. I move affirmative action on zoning bylaw amendment, personal wireless communications facility.
I don't know how the planning board,
I don't think we.
recommendation on
I
this.
think we have to wait on this, don't we?
I'd like to wait until
Yeah.
the planning board
Yeah.
does its thing.
Okay.
So could we put it off to town meeting?
Yes, so I move that the select board report at town meeting on Article 40, zoning bylaw amendment, personal wireless communication facility.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 41, General Bylaw Amendment for Tree Preservation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 42, authorize Cambridge Turnpike easements.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 43, Munson Road street acceptance.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Let's see. I move no action on Article 44, a moratorium on implementation of NRC dog restrictions on conservation land.
No action.
No
That's
action.
no
Second.
action. But that's also not being moved, right?
No, that's
No, that's being
45.
moved, and
45.
I would be in favor of that. We've had a lot of citizen involvement and communication regarding, and I think there's activity being done to see if there's kind of a less intrusive manner to deal with the issue. If, I just think that the number of citizens who have been involved in this and who've communicated deserve to have a hearing on it. I would be in favor of theirs.
So, well, I just want to make sure I understand your position and what the article says. The article is asking that we have a moratorium on a regulatory decision made by a regulatory board of the town, the NRC, after probably a year worth of public meetings and public hearings. And I know that people who may not all feel that they were listened to or that their thoughts were incorporated into the final decisions, but I can't fault the process of the regulatory board and how they came to their conclusion.
I'm not necessarily faulting their process. What I'm saying, I guess, to them is, given the reaction to their proposals, does it make sense for them to reconsider in light of that and see whether there might be some more areas where they might be able to compromise and reach an agreement that will be more enforceable? My concern always with regulations and banning things is that if you don't have the citizens in favor of it, it doesn't work. I mean, that's really, frankly, the marijuana issue in some ways. We've had marijuana illegal for my whole life, since something like 1910, and yet the public doesn't accept that as being something that should be illegal. And it seems to me to try to enforce, I worry that once we've got these regulations of having on leash and having these various controls, that you've got a population who uses that area that does not believe that the regulations are necessary. It's going to be, it's not going to be a healthy thing to try to enforce.
Well, I'm curious about the way I read this article, which is on any new regulations. So it's not looking at a moratorium on
Well, and yeah.
votes that were taken, but on votes that have not yet been taken.
I mean, because I think that's what the concern is, how, what's the next step?
So it's a moratorium on a statutory body about future
Well,
decisions.
It's not as strict, as I read it, it's not, because I don't think that the town meeting has the authority to tell them. I think it's if you will, a sense of the community. And
Jane's
I
point,
think
though,
that.
Tom, Jane's point is not that. Jane's point is the word new. This, the current decision made by the NRC
Right.
is history. So if this is adopted at town meeting, it would be any new
Correct, yeah.
regulation. So the regulation that we've heard all the complaints about isn't affected by this warrant article.
Right, but I think there's a concern that was kind of the first step of further processes.
But I don't see how you can constrain
Right.
a regulatory body in the future. I just don't.
I don't think that this doesn't give, that you don't have the ability to do that, but you do have the ability to communicate with them through this mechanism of letting people vote and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, if you do something new, recognize that the town people who show up at the town meeting have this feeling about it. I mean, it may go, if it goes down at town meeting, it's just a feedback mechanism is the way I view it.
So you're almost saying it's a non-binding, I mean, it would be.
Yeah,
It's
Right.
not,
It is
it's
a
not
non-binding.
binding.
Well, I understand that, I'm just.
Period.
Right.
Because it
Well,
can't be binding.
I'm kind of against supporting the article similarly for that reason. I mean, the NRC, all the work that commission has done over the years has really made Concord a very special place. And I think they're very sensitive about the process. They understand the sensitivities of this particular situation.
I agree.
I think in other sites where there was some, regulations for managing pets, requiring leashes, White Pond, Madison Field, I don't think the backlash was that severe when those
I think those were understood and accepted. I think the problem was this process, the result frankly wasn't accepted. It didn't see that there was the need, and the concern is that because the feeling is they didn't see the need, the question is, okay, are they going to, keep proceeding?
And it's interesting because as the liaison to the NRC, I kept watching the process and thinking that the headline that was buried is that it was very limited in its scope. That there wasn't it seemed very intentional to me that the NRC was limiting their vote and their scope to the areas discussed. So that's what I witnessed. But obviously in every proceeding, there are people who are unhappy with the result. I mean, that is always the case.
I think it went more than just unhappy with the result, frankly. I mean, I think it was a feeling that sort of anti-dog walkers.
Well, that's the feelings of people who are unhappy with the vote.
But the problem was, we're not talking about, I mean, we have, most issues that come before the board, there are some people unhappy with the vote, but it's usually a small minority of people who that's the situation with. In this, we had a petition of, 600 or 700 people. I mean, it was highly unusual, and I think based upon that, they should be able to be heard on this as a non-binding.
They were heard.
So, we can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
You know, it's
No,
a good
it's great.
discussion. I just want to make note that the description of the article by the petitioner would also require, or not require, but request that the NRC undertake some additional studies and analysis, which isn't part of the warrant article as written.
I
but the
raised concern
description
about the
says-
description when it was.
It says that the committee, the NRC, would use the moratorium period to collect quantitative data on if, what, where, and how damage is occurring. So that's almost like a whole separate discussion than a 2-year moratorium, which is the vote, which is that no more new regs. That would limit dogs. And the description almost doesn't, maybe the moderator has another opinion about that, but the description to the article compels in some way the NRC to do
To take
extensive
action,
studying
right.
on dogs and impacts.
I mean, I think it's fairly clear that the town meeting cannot compel the NRC to take any particular action. It can recommend, and if you will, I mean, it's an ability to let democracy, this is what the people would like to have so that they can more fully understand the judgment on this. I mean, the regulations, there was not any, if you will, extensive findings of fact or anything that normally when you have governmental regulations, you get some basis for it. And there's nothing in writing that I'm aware of for the regulation. So I think that it's a recommendation from, and the, you know, the town meeting may, nothing says that the town meeting's going to vote favorably on this. And if it doesn't, then it seems to me the people who may not have been satisfied with the ruling have to take that into account and say, okay.
You're right. So it sounds like our vote is split on this one, which is okay.
Are we going to vote?
I think we did, because I wrote notes. Do we need to re-vote on this one?
Did we vote?
I didn't think we
I
did.
don't think we did.
Okay.
Did we have a second?
Yeah, second. Yes, I seconded.
Okay, all in favor?
To recommend no action?
To recommend
No action.
no action.
Action.
Aye.
Aye.
And one, no.
So if there are articles not to be moved, should we still,
Just no motion expected.
just
You
no
don't need to
motion
vote.
expected for Article 45?
Wait a
I
minute.
would-
No, that's,
I would like to take a position on Article 46.
right.
Given what we heard tonight from the petitioners, I don't think it does any harm, and
Okay.
so
Should we also do that for 45
Should we do
then?
that on 45?
Yeah.
That's the
we
question.
might as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be a-
I move no action on Article 45, recognizing dog walking as a passive recreation activity.
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
I move no action on Article 46, bylaw prohibiting use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. Let's see, 47, I move affirmative action on Article 47, light plan expenditures and payment in lieu of taxes.
Second.
No amount required. Thanks.
461,000? Is that the right?
Yep.
But that's just that's a portion of it yet.
We don't have the number yet?
We don't, we don't vote we don't know what the costs of the operating the light plan is going to be, so we don't specify the amount.
Okay, so it's just, right.
So second?
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 48, solid waste disposal fund expenditures.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 49, sewer system expenditures.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 50, sewer improvement fund expenditures. Are there amount? No, there's no values.
All in favor?
I move affirmative action on Article 51, water system expenditures.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
I move affirmative action on Article 52, BD Swim and Fitness Center Enterprise Fund expenditures. Oh, there's no amount yet? Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. And no unpaid bills.
Oh, I'm in favor of no unpaid bills.
Oh, I wish I had them.
Oh, that was the easiest we've done.
Yeah. What's a
This
fairly,
is the least amount of time I think we've taken.
Moving.
all right, onward and upward and out. So we'll see, where's my green? Where's my sheet? There it is. All right,
Public comments.
okay. So, public comments, I know that there's some. Come hither, please.
Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road, Concord. In this case, I speak for the league, except that I can't seem to open my phone, which is why my notes are. So just a second.
I'm sorry, you said Beatty?
No, she's
No,
speaking for
it's
the
not about the
league.
meeting.
League.
I'd be happy to represent it. Oh, wow.
You're speaking representative Beatty.
No, the League of Women Voters. I think our first concern surrounds Article 21, and it has to do with town capital expenditures. In particular, we feel that in the public hearings, not enough detail was presented. This is simply a recommendation from the League that a greater and fuller understanding of particularly items 4 and 5 items take place, specifically around item 4, the parking lot restoration. I believe from the comments that were from questions that were asked, and commentary that came forward, that is about the Wheeler parking lot, Harvey Wheeler parking lot. What percentage of that money is being spent on that as opposed to the road? How many additional spaces it will provide? I think that kind of detail would help a lot. And then in the human services, the library efficient energy systems. We understand that right now the library is requesting $150,000 for that lighting. What that means is that it's very unclear what the lighting means. And we also understand that perhaps in the next year, they might request as much as $550,000 in additional funds for lighting systems. And I think it would be prudent for us to understand what that means, what the implications are, what kind of lighting, how extensive that is, would it take into account an expanded library, were that project to be undertaken with success. And in addition, I think some clarification about, just for the town again, as to why this is not a library corporation responsibility, but in fact falls to the town. And I think that would be helpful for everyone involved. And then,
And I'm sorry, Diane, are you suggesting that it'd be helpful to have that information before town meeting, or it would be helpful to include that information in the presentation?
maybe both, Chris, but definitely at the presentation. And it certainly would be helpful for people. Thank you for asking, ahead of town meeting. But for that information is not always, absorbed successfully. And so I just think at the town meeting it would be important, because it evoked a lot of questions, but not a lot of, it was hard to figure out how to ask those, how to ask the question in a way that got the kind of information people needed. On Article 25, we have quite a few concerns, however. This is the 369 Commonwealth Avenue, the Giroux land, our property. And those questions circle around essentially three issues. The market value of that property is something that we're not certain is entirely clear. And whether that land can be divided, apparently several years ago there was a petition to subdivide that property, and what that might mean in terms of money. We're curious about the valuation of that property. That's the first thing. And we wish that could be a little bit clearer before we proceed. If we are to secure that property, there are a lot of costs, particularly if Warner Pond becomes a swimming area. If that does become a swimming area, all sorts of costs will be incurred in the future by the town. Lifeguards, police observations, the kinds, and just the keeping that area clean. It's going to require the DPW or some organization in town to spend more money and more time in that particular place. The house itself, and this is the third thing, the house itself, we understand that the Concord Housing Authority was not brought into the discussion about the possible demolition of that house. And they seem to feel that they would like to take a look at that property to see whether it might be an appropriate property to be used for diverse income use, or for people who perhaps cannot afford the ongoing costs of housing in Concord. It just seems that dialogue or that discourse would be a very helpful one to have, perhaps before even town meeting, if that were possible. I believe they're meeting tomorrow night, a consortium of the housing authorities on March 20th, which I believe is tomorrow evening, and perhaps entering into some discussion with them would not be unproductive. If, in fact, that house were not to be torn down, if that house were to be converted for some sort of town use, because of its proximity to the rail trail, then questions about perhaps using that house for just have bathrooms along the rail trail. One of the things was Concord, I believe, is concerned about is how will we provide facilities for people who are using the rail trail? Where will they stop? How will they use it? So as a recreation spot in West Concord, we might use that space to answer some of those concerns or needs. Any rate, therefore, I guess there was a fourth point, and that is until the long-range plan has been thoroughly digested and accepted, would we lose this property if we were to take some time first to think about that property in relationship to the long-range plan?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Is that, oh, okay. Oh. I see the town moderator.
Yeah, just a quick note. My memory is that there are bathroom facilities planned for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail as part of the parking lot project that is
Yes.
across the street from the prison. I
Yes.
just have a memory of that from, yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. All right. And so now we go into liaison reports, and I have snow days on my mind, so I don't think I have very much to report. Anybody else?
Well, I had a couple, but they could certainly wait until
I
our
do know
next
that we have
meeting,
other
'cause
things
we've
to
got
do
A
tonight,
little bit
so
more to cover.
Just a couple of important, we have honored citizen this coming Saturday.
Oh, I'm glad you
Mr.
mentioned
Terry.
that,
Yes,
yes.
it's at Harvey Wheeler.
Oh, okay.
So it's a different venue, it's a different day, so
It's Saturday at Harvey
And a
Wheeler.
different honored citizen, too.
we may have to go back on the list with other folks again, but.
We don't have an email on this one yet to remind us, huh?
1 o'clock?
I
think.
1:30?
1:30 this Saturday, so 1:30 on the 24th, right? Okay.
Jim Terry?
Yes, Mr. Terry is our honored,
Well
Recipient.
earned.
1 o'clock,
yeah,
1:30, I thought he said.
1:30?
I could verify that.
yeah.
Oh, that's great.
And Harvey Wheeler.
Harvey Wheeler. Anything else? You said you had a couple of items.
And
there.
then just that, as mentioned, the affordable housing groups are meeting tomorrow evening.
Where's that going to be?
I believe it is at.
On Stowe Street.
Yes,
Housing authority?
Peter,
Peter Buckley
Buckley, I'm sorry.
Terrace.
Peter
right.
Buckley.
Okay.
It's in the, kind of the community area.
And you said
so-
7:30?
Yes.
Yes.
Honored citizens, 1:30.
1:30 on
1:30,
Saturday.
thank you.
Tomorrow night, all the housing groups are meeting at 7:30 at Peter Buckley. Great.
I want to make sure that everybody received an invitation for their topping off ceremony for the Minuteman
we did.
Regional High School. Carmen, she probably got her invitation, but this was a long time in
Yeah.
coming, and
Absolutely.
the foundation is complete, the steelwork is coming to an end. There was, Steve, you'd appreciate one comment. There was a steel beam that will hold up the second floor in the theater section that weighed 26,000 pounds and required two cranes to balance it on where
That's
it
a
was.
long span, I'm sure.
It's a long span and a heavy piece of metal.
And the tree that they put in, is that one that fell down on one of the recent storms?
They haven't put it yet.
Or will they be planting it in front? Yeah. Great.
So, it'll be good to see the status of the project.
Absolutely.
It's looking
Any
great.
other pertinent timing issues? Other
The
than
election?
What?
Is there an election?
There is an election. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, please come out and vote on the 27th of
Tuesday?
March, Tuesday. We have
Anything important?
multiple unopposed offices, but that doesn't mean they don't need votes.
That's right.
So, thank you. I'm sorry, what?
Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. I hope everybody will vote on the 27th.
I do too.
We were very fortunate to have those people running for office to attend a candidating session. It was fantastic, and I would really urge everyone in the town to get out and vote because acclamation of and approval of those folks is as important as anything.
Yes. As I said yesterday ad nauseum, we don't have enough people running for things, so let's make sure that we support those who do.
Don't let the Russians interfere.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I was not something I was quite anticipating, but Oh, my. All right, so miscellaneous correspondence. Is there anything?
I won.
I'm sorry, what?
That's how I won.
Oh, okay. Yes, let's get on to the nominations.
Sorry about that. Let's see. Here we go. I nominate Stanley Lux of 165 Indian Spring Road to the Pollinator Health Advisory Committee.
Woohoo!
Frederick Miller of 300 Main Street to the Trustees of Town Donations. Gail Heyer of 54 Nancy Road to the Suasco River Stewardship Council as an alternate member. I move for committee appointments. I move to appoint Carlin Reed of 83 Wits End Road to the PEG Access Advisory Committee for a term to expire May 31st, 2021. Margaret Wargelin of 97 Hillside Avenue to the PEG Access Advisory Committee for a term to expire May 31st, 2020. And Scott Hopkinson of 67 Indian Spring Road to the PEG Access Advisory Committee for a term to expire May 31st, 2019.
All in favor?
Aye. I move to extend current comprehensive long-range plan committee appointments. John Boynton, Margaret Briggs, James Bryant, Peter Hunter, Wally Johnston, Gary Kleiman, Baron Lambert, Barbara Morse, Sharon Lenhart, Nick Pappas, Wade Rubenstein, Elise Woodward, and Judith Zombrecker to June 30th, 2018.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And thanks, too.
Yeah, thank you. And I move that we adjourn to executive session for the purposes of discussing land acquisition,
The Commonwealth Act.
Commonwealth Avenue property, and litigation, Estabrook Road and W.R. Grace
And Nagog
taking, and Nagog Pond, and to not reconvene in open session. The executive session is needed to protect strategy discussions affecting litigation on the stated matters.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.